Welcome to the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. This is Doctora Yvette Martinez Vu, and I will be serving as your femtor, providing you with tips and tricks and everything else you need to know to get into graduate school. For the past 10 years, I've been helping undergraduate students get into top graduate programs in their field, and I'm really excited to share this information with you too.
All right. We are recording. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited today. I have another amazing guest, and I am going to go ahead and get started by sharing her bio. So today's topic is on perfectionism in grad school, and there's a little voice in the back of my head that's like wanting me to do things right now as well. So it's a perfect topic for today, perfectionism. So our guest is Veronica Ello. Is that how you say your last name?
Yes? Ello, okay.
Yeah. Great, Ello. And she is a bilingual licensed clinical social worker in Los Angeles. She provides therapy for individuals and couples. She has a passion for working with mothers, new and seasoned, and first-generation students. Awesome. She's also a recovering perfectionist, and her experiences through motherhood and navigating the higher education system as a first-generation student made her aware of her perfectionistic tendencies. And she is actively working on decreasing them for herself and also to provide tools for others to do the same, to live more fulfilling lives. Welcome, Veronica. So happy to have you.
Thank you for having me on. I'm so glad to be able to talk about this. It's a big topic.
It is a big topic. I'm not going to lie. I personally struggled with it. I continue to struggle with it. So I'm happy to have you on today. I would like to start, maybe if you can share a little bit more about yourself, your background, anything that you'd feel comfortable sharing, and also kind of how it relates to your experience navigating perfectionism.
Okay. So y'all know I'm a social worker, so I'm a therapist, right? All about mental health and just the importance of it. And I always say part of what led me into the field is just my own experiences growing up. So I am a first generation Afro-Latina. I was primarily raised by my mother. So a little bit about me, I'm biracial. My dad is Nigerian and my mother is Mexican. And so I was very much raised in her culture and her traditions and customs and things like that. But since my parents were divorced, they got divorced when I was young. So that meant that as the older sister, I was placed with a lot of responsibility.
Oh, I can I'm sharing that as well.
It's hard. It's a lot of work. So it was, and, I actually didn't become aware of that, one, about the term, even what a perfectionism was, until I think I was in like my master's program. I was getting my social work degree, and I had maybe thought like, yeah, I like things a certain way, or like I definitely struggled with it. But I didn't necessarily hear the term until I was getting my MSW. And then I was like, oh, this is me. I need things to be a certain way all the time. Like I need them to, or if they're not, the internal dialogue that I was having with myself was so bad. And I think people didn't necessarily see it on the outside, because I do, want to say, like, growing up, I wasn't necessarily encouraged to talk about how I felt on the inside. You just got to keep going, like, just keep doing that. And and it's hard, right? Because in the same way, it's like, I do want to keep going, but also I don't feel good. I don't feel good doing this all the time, right? And so, as I, became a social worker, and then I ended up going back to school to get my doctorate when after I had my daughter. So I got accepted timeline. I got accepted while I was pregnant with her, just found out. If there's many things of adding on another role, is that you cannot do it all. Like, you cannot do it all. And even, it's just, I had to do something about it because it was not sustainable. And, I don't think I'm perfect anymore, as I like to define, on like that I've like overcome it, but I definitely am more conscious of it. And I think that's a big part of the message of why I wanted to talk about, this, is because I think sometimes, even as recovering perfectionists, like, we still want things to be perfect, even though we don't want it to be perfect. If that kind of makes sense. Like, we know it's a bad tendency, but we want, when we can get in that loop, we can get into it. So I have to say that I'm like still in it, naming that still happens, because I mean, part of it is, and not all people who are perfectionists came from, background like that I'm describing, but there is this piece when you did have to grow up sooner, and when you had to have more responsibilities, and if there wasn't necessarily an encouragement to talk about what you were going through, because the adults in your life were not talking about what they had to go through, like we just internalize a lot of these things. And so we have to name them. That's kind of like the first thing. Let's name that it's happening so that we can start to fight them. So that's a little bit about me.
I have a feeling that a good number of my listeners, because a lot of them are first gen, and they're students of color, some of them are like high achieving. They probably have these tendencies. So how would you know that you're a perfectionist? Like, what are some of the traits? You mentioned having certain internal dialogues, wanting things a certain way. Like, I can probably predict what some of the traits are, because I know I am a perfect. I don't know if I would even call myself recovering. I think I'm still struggling with it, but at least I'm conscious of it, and I go through that cycle that you mentioned, or that loop.
Yeah. And I think it looks different for everyone, right? So, I'll talk about I hate to use the word general, but kind of like some of the common characteristics that I see, right? So I see definitely the negative self-talk, right? When things don't go necessarily the way that you want them to, or how you had planned that they would go, right? The high standards that you have for yourself and for others, because people are flawed, we are flawed, and people, especially other people out of your control, when you find like feeling extremely irritable, or to the point where you're looking at yourself like, why am I so mad about that this didn't go this way, right? Like group projects, y'all, we're in school, group projects, right?
That's a struggle.
That's a whole episode, but group projects, right? When you're upset because someone isn't holding, and I will say someone not holding up their own end is its thing, but like when, let's say, an emergency happens and they can't come in, I think of an example of, or opposite, when you're trying to anticipate everything. So for example, let's say you have a group project and you're like, okay, I got all these things planned and this may happen, so I'm going to plan to make that, perfect, right? And that's not a good trait, and as I'm saying that, I'm going to call myself out. My daughter was born my first semester in my doctorate program, and I had a group project, and I was that person like, okay, y'all, so I may go into labor. So if I go into labor, that means that I'm not here, but I will do all the work and I'll have all these pieces, but I just may not be able to talk about them. And I sent it all, like, as if I could predict when my daughter's going to come. Like, it sounds,
I did the same thing, prepping for my mat leave.
But do you see, it's like, but you're going to have a baby. Like, on this end, if that person was in my group, right, I'd be like, don't worry about it. Do what you can do, right? And I did have people in my group that were like, it's okay. I feel like if there's a reason not to be here, it would be because of, you gave birth. But we have those tendencies of wanting to leave things, even to the point where you're exhausted, and I think so. Some people that come in, so when I see clients that come in, they notice that it can be either someone pointed it out. So for example, it got to a point that they didn't start something, or they were supposed to, like, I've had people, especially students, where they're like, I had to, do this paper or this huge project or this grant or these big things, and I just froze. Like, it was like the tipping point of it. Like, I just kept saying that I wanted it to be perfect, and we procrastinate, right? Because we're like, I need it to be perfect, right? And so, but procrastination is not good. I'm guilty of it too, y'all. So I'm not saying don't be procrastinator, but to the point where it's like so many procrastinated events that you're just running on fumes, right? And so, I've had clients that have been like, someone told me, like, is this even a thing? Because I'm getting things done. I'm crossing off my goals, but I'm just not happy. Like, I'm just not. And then, the question is like, what is happiness? Because I've always been at this trait. I get praised, right, for doing all these things. And so it's reinforced, but we're not doing so well. We're not doing so hot. So kind of like balancing that piece.
I can imagine a lot of us that identify as perfectionists or recovering perfectionists also have struggled with people pleasing, because so there's that external factor too. And then I think you kind of tied into this, but I wanted to ask, like, maybe how perfectionism can come up in grad school. So you kind of started to hint at it with the procrastination, which is a big one in grad school. And then I think there's that element of people pleasing, and then there might even be an element of guilt, or at least in my experience, I've had that feeling of guilt for either not doing things a certain way, or constantly that negative self-talk of like nothing is ever good enough, especially in grad school when you receive a lot of what's the word? I'm like constructive criticism, or yes.
And we're in systems that, you know, I think we're stepping in there as people of color, we're getting in there, but look, higher ed wasn't made with us in mind. Okay, y'all. So we're already battling that piece. And then I think the piece that kind of ties into it in grad school is it can tie into imposter syndrome, right? Of feeling like I didn't do it the way I should have done this, or I didn't put as much effort as I should have done, or feeling guilty because you procrastinated. And it's like, I'm going to be found out that I don't belong here, right? Because I didn't do it perfectly. And the thing is you never reach perfect, whatever that is, right? Like whatever, you know, even if you didn't procrastinate, you're going to be changing something or doing these things. And so, you know, in grad school, I think it can show up. And again, like you said, that piece of like, it's being reinforced and it's being said like, hey, you know, it's a good thing. But then we're walking around sleep deprived, right? Or not really even enjoying our experience of why do we want to get here, right? So a lot of the people that I see come to me after they've like completed this degree and they're like, look, I worked so hard. And yet I kind of realized I didn't even pay attention, not pay attention, but like you learned, but I didn't live. I didn't enjoy this time, or really like, you know, when people pat me in the back to say like, hey, you did this. And it's like, I can't even tell you all these memories because I was hustling so hard. There's nothing wrong with the hustle, y'all. It's just like learning to also not necessarily always be like keyed up or ready to like give our best all the time, you know, like that's also not sustainable.
Yeah, the one thing that's helped me a lot, I'm sure it's true for you too, is with, well, one thing is I wanted you to clarify like the difference between someone who's perfectionistic and someone who's a recovering perfectionist, because I think I'm closer to the recovering side. And what has helped for me has been becoming a mom. Not that I'm saying everybody do this, but because you have very limited time, you have to learn to be as efficient as possible. And you have to learn to be okay with what's good enough and not what's perfect. But yeah, if you could share a little bit more about like, what's the difference? How do you know if you are a recovering perfectionist or recovered? Is there such a thing as someone who's like fully recovered from perfectionism? Because in my experience, I still struggle with it, and I'm just kind of learning tools to kind of combat it, or to kind of suppress, but like to manage it.
Yeah. And I don't know if there's a recovered, yeah. So we're gonna say us who like the end goal and put in a nice little pretty bow at the end. Like I don't know about that piece. I think the reason that I use recovering is because you have to be aware of it, but aware that how it's negatively impacting you. All right. So the example that I can think of is sometimes we have. Well, I'll pick on myself, so I won't disclose anything. You know, like I, for a very long time, knew that I needed things in a certain way. You know, we had to be on time all the time. We had to, you know, with group projects, I very much would take on this leadership role, and like, you know, to the point that I was burning myself out, right? But I didn't think I could have said that I like things to be perfect, but I didn't think it was an issue because, hey, I'm getting all these things done. Like I'm doing these things, and it wasn't only, and I will say, yes, similar to you, like motherhood really came and humbled me very much.
Yeah, I know. It's like trying to plan around being a mom or around having a baby.
Yes. And I think that piece that comes with being a mom, I'm not saying become parents, y'all, but it's that we become so conscious of the person that we're influencing.
That's true.
Right. Like, especially little people. Yeah. I'm not saying that us as adults, like us who we're talking, that we're not influencing each other. I think we do, but we give more credit to, you know, you can figure things out, you can work things out. But kids, like especially little ones, we think like we want to give them such a healthy environment, such a good place. because they don't necessarily have those tools yet. And so for the people who are maybe not parents, you don't have to wait until you become a parent, or if you decide to become a parent, but I very much the work that I will do in session is like, what would you tell little you, your inner child, your little person in you, you know? Would you tell her, like, why didn't you do this way? You know, like, would you yell at her if it's to her, you know, like, probably not. Now, I will say maybe some of us did grow up in those environments where we were scolded for that, right?
Oh, yeah.
But we can acknowledge that if we were scolded or if we were told to do things in this way, oftentimes that was that adult's coping mechanism too, right? Yeah. It wasn't a healthy one. And we can acknowledge that it wasn't healthy. And now we can look at, okay, how would I have wished someone would have talked to me, you know? And so in session with me, we very much use this of our little people, like I call them little us, you know, of like, how can we talk to each other? How can we talk to ourselves in this way that can really be beneficial, right? And that's really where the recovering piece comes from, is acknowledging that, yes, it serves me well, but I am not going to enjoy my life, you know, if I'm always in this place. Because some of these traits are amazing, okay, especially as first-gen students. Like, let's call this out. We are breaking barriers and we're doing the work, and that is amazing. But sometimes we can ask people, are we happy? Do we know when to not keep breaking barriers? Do we know when we can look around and be like, hey, I'm good, you know? Like, the balance is, I think you just become more aware. It becomes more second nature, right? So like, first step would be like, okay, you acknowledge that you're recovering and you acknowledge that this is not good. And then you start integrating some different tools. They still will happen, okay? I will still sometimes have bouts of like, we need to be here on time in this way and dressed in this way. And, you know, but what I'm aware of is what's happening. I can often stop and say, what's happening for me? Like, why is this coming up, right? And it takes practice to kind of be aware of it, and then to be able to say, like, if I do it in this way, is it going to benefit me? Or am I thinking, you know, am I perceiving that it, because of who am I trying to impress, right? My mother-in-law coming over, or, you know, something like that. So the recovering is just acknowledging and wanting to do something about it. And then perfection is, if you just call yourself that, then that's okay, you know, but maybe you're not wanting to do anything about that, okay? And that's okay if you don't want to, you know, and that's okay.
So in some, you're saying there are definitely strengths to being perfectionistic, and in some cases, or in some parts of it, it might be okay. Yeah, it might be okay to do certain things a certain way. I've been called very like type A, and some of my students who see me
themselves in you,
or see themselves see themselves in me, also struggle with it. They're like, yeah, I'm type A, I like having things done a certain way. And I think part of it is a lot of folks who either grow up with a certain background, or they're also like the old elder sibling. So I can see a lot of kind of overlap there. But then for students who may be struggling a lot, maybe it is getting in the way, maybe they are procrastinating, or they find themselves just not really enjoying what they're doing because of such high standards. What would you recommend in terms of tools, in terms of strategies, things that they can try out to decrease those perfectionistic tendencies, or at least to manage them a little bit better?
If it's no longer serving you, one, if you have access to, seek counseling. Okay, I know not everyone can seek that, but if you're in school and you have student health insurance, seek someone else to, for lack of a better word, call you out on what's happening with you. Because I think sometimes we can get into this, I can do this myself, I can, you know, use these tools and it'll be better. And I'm not saying that you can't always, but sometimes we have blind spots to ourselves, right? And so if you're able to get a third party, a close friend who's able to be honest, something like that, I think that can first be the first part. The second piece is, if you're into meditation, right? That would be a like a practical tool that I would recommend. And it doesn't have to be long. And it doesn't mean that I want you like humming, like, cross-legged in nature. It's more of the tendency to be able to sit with the feelings or emotions or thoughts that are coming up for you, right? Because I think sometimes we will procrastinate. That's going to happen, right? I bet even if you're outside of school, right? There's going to be things that we love doing. I love washing dishes. I never procrastinate washing dishes because that is my thing that I love to do. Yes, I love it. I love it. But if you ask me to clean the bathroom, right? Because I'm trying to pick examples that are not school-wise. You ask me to clean the bathroom, all of a sudden, I got all these things that I got to do, right? And it's not helping me because we do need to have a clean bathroom, right? So what I do is I be able to sit with meditation, being able to sit with, okay, yeah, this makes me uncomfortable. I just don't like getting on my knees to scrub a tub. It's just not what I like. It's not what I, and so it still needs to get done if you're in school. So if you're talking about students that have to do these projects or have to do these things, and it's like, okay, can I break it down? Can I do just a small thing? Can I just clean the sink and then let me walk out? Can I just breaking it down and being able to sit with that? What is my tolerance of it? Sometimes setting of timers can be a way of doing that, because I can kind of be like, okay, like I did my 15 minutes check, it wasn't too bad, it can be like another practical tool about that. Affirmations. I think some people discount affirmations, but
I never used to be a fan. Now I am, but like when I was younger, I was like, oh, like affirmations, those don't work to me. It's overly positive, and but now they work. I noticed that sometimes they work.
It's because it's hard to change that core belief inside you. Okay, these are things like messages that we think about ourselves, especially being perfectionists. We are not even aware of where these messages came from, that we had to be perfect. Oftentimes it's only through like going through counseling or your own work that you kind of do to call it out. So it makes sense that affirmations kind of seem like, well, this is silly, like why would I keep doing that? But the idea, belief of I have to be perfect came from somewhere. It's just you weren't aware that it was being told to you. So affirmations are one, right? One that I recite to often and give to clients is to say, like, I am enough just as I am. I am enough just as I am. Put that on a Post-it. Y'all put it while you're brushing your teeth. Repeat it over and over. I am enough just as I am. Or if you acknowledge that your perfectionist tendencies have to do with people pleasing, is to say that I let go of the need for other people's approval. And sometimes when you say those things, it's like, wow, I don't believe it. I do need people's approval. And that's okay. Right. And that kind of ties into this ability to be able to sit with these uncomfortable emotions of like, why am I procrastinating? What is it that I need it to be perfect? Right. Like sometimes when you're procrastinating, which is why often I'll say like, seek the help of someone outside of you. So someone can kind of say like, hey, like Veronica, you're procrastinating. Like, whether it's therapy once a week or a friend being like, so what's happening? What is it that you're scared of, right? Let's identify what's there. What is, can we make it into like bite-sized pieces for you, right? And then the last thing that kind of may not feel like a practical tool is if you're able to just go for a walk, like get out, right? Nothing, no podcast, no listening to music, y'all. Just okay. I'm saying like literally go get out. Because you're like, I'm gonna get out there and I'm gonna no, don't do anything.
I'm trying to make my walk productive.
Yes, I know. Perfectionists out there, I see you. But to just do, like to get out 10 minutes, something, right? And then say, when I come back, I'm gonna try, right? The thing is nothing is going, it's a process. And when we can begin to accept that this is a process, these tendencies came up in me because of my life journey and my life experiences, and I may struggle with this, right? But just like I need to get out for walks or runs or eat healthy-ish, right? or need a certain amount of hugs or affection, I'm not always going to be perfect at it, but if I can just acknowledge that I just sometimes need to put in a little bit more work in these areas, it could be a little bit more manageable, right? Instead of it always having to be perfect.
I feel like you've covered so much already, and I know you also yourself offer therapy services. So would you mind sharing kind of some of your services, or do you know what kind of work you do with individuals or with couples, or even how that relates to helping them with perfectionism, if that comes up?
So I work with couples. Let's backtrack. I work with individuals. I do, kind of what you think about talk therapy, but through Zoom now,
Nice.
Because I'm not seeing clients in person yet. I don't know when that'll be, y'all, but we'll see when that day comes. And a lot of the time people don't come in because they're like, I'm a perfectionist. They come in because something happened, right? Like, or not. I talk about that a lot on my, Instagram. It's like, you don't need to come to therapy because something happened. Like, you can come for a community or support. That's something that also COVID really did for us, right?
Yeah.
It was kind of normalized that maybe I do need community and I need to talk to someone about some of these things when we're not able to do, right? So COVID, in my practice of seeing, especially first generation students or individuals, sometime between the ages of, like, I'd say a client age would be like 20s to 40s, right? Is this a thing that we no longer could do? The world shut down, so we could no longer do. And so for us that were struggling with put our worth towards what we did, right? We struggled in 2020, myself included. Okay, I'm not naming anyone, myself included. And so it was a good opportunity to slow down. So for individuals, kind of being able to kind of acknowledge that. And as the world is opening up, I know that it's going to come. I don't want to necessarily take off the spotlight from individual work of coming to talk to someone. It doesn't have to be. It's not, I always like to say, it's not actually what people maybe think it is. Like, you have to have had some traumatic event or, it has to be all bad or all tears. Sometimes it's just a very skill building to kind of say, like, hey, like, let me just learn these skills and try them out, right? Some symbol, like, kind of, I said, like, go for a walk. I've had clients that have been like, I didn't think a walk was going to be a thing. That's not very therapy-like, right? But I'm like, go, it's okay, and just to it's kind of like that, where, like, you learn small skills that can really be helpful. And then with couples, some of the work that I see there is the expectation of mind reading comes up in couples, right? Of like, I like things a certain way, so you should like things a certain way. I'm not calling anyone out, except myself, but it's what we expect, right? Or of in couples feeling burnt out because we're not asking for help, because we like things to be perfect. We're the only ones. We have this belief that we're the only ones that can do this way, and the reality is that's not sustainable. It's not, doesn't stop me from sometimes getting in that space, okay, calling myself out or others, but it's how can I become aware of it to know, like, how is that impacting how am I showing up in my relationship with another person or in my work if I'm individual, things like that. So perfectionism comes up a lot, right? And we do unfortunately live in a culture that values what we're doing, and very much tries to, our worth can sometimes feel tied to that. And so mental health services kind of like trying to pull from that a little bit and be like, you're not just what you do, or you're also not just one person, right? Like, in terms of identity, right? Sometimes, especially because I see mothers, right? And they're like, as a mother, I want to show up in this way and I have to be perfect in this way. And I'm like, you're not just a mother either. That's not sustainable, right? So, that's kind of the work that I do, like one-on-one or in couples. And then I'm also showing up on Instagram. So if anyone wants to see like free tips and stuff like that, I kind of do some of that, because I think it's good sometimes just to become aware of where do we need additional help. And that doesn't mean I have to be your therapist. It could just be like, oh, hey, I struggle with this, let me, maybe seek out help, or, so just trying to share things like that too.
I've seen some of your posts and they're really handy. I can certainly relate to a lot of them. Would you mind sharing what your Instagram handle is so that folks who want to add you can add you?
Yeah, it's at Dr. Veronica EO. So just my name, Veronica spelled traditionally, and my last name is really easy, EYO. And so, yeah, I kind of my way of one, giving back, but also because, we need to connect. We need to connect from social media. So if I can add one last little tip of what led me into kind of putting myself out in social media land, is that COVID, took away our ability to be able to interact with people. And one of the things that I would often prompt clients to do to seek community is in pages such as mine, in terms of like, oh, this is a skill that I could use. And oftentimes someone will write a comment like, oh yeah, this is so handy, I love this, right? And like maybe being bold and kind of sometimes pushing that reply button and be like, me too, all right? And developing community. I know that that's not perfect, you guys, but that's what we had to do during COVID times. And it really has, of the clients that have kind of, it doesn't have to be only my page. There's a lot of pages out there, y'all, that kind of have similar things where it's an ability to acknowledge that other people are also struggling in some of these things too. And it can help to kind of build community and acknowledge that you're not the only one, and maybe make you feel a little bit less scary or tough to kind of handle those things. So just wanting to share that piece too.
Thank you so much for saying that, because I mean, I host this podcast and people come to me for advice all the time, and I still struggle. Like I still struggle with reaching out. I still struggle with hitting that reply button. Like there's still that introverted part of me that's like, I don't want to, it's too much, it's overwhelming. But it's actually a good reminder because, for sometimes like people stray away from social media, myself included, because it can feel like too much or toxic in some ways. But there's also ways I'm learning just from you and others who are on social media, providing really great content, that it is a community building tool if you implement it in that way, if you like curate it in such a way. And so I think that's really helpful. We wouldn't be having this conversation if you hadn't hit that button, if you hadn't sent me a message.
Yeah.
So that's great. Yeah. I want to thank you so much for your time. I gained a lot personally from just hearing you speak. I'm sure my listeners will as well. And again, everybody follow her on IG so that we can all keep learning.
Thank you.
And maybe some of them will reach out to you and want to work with you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It's definitely, we got to keep fighting on this grad school and for after life, because it's work. So, I'm glad that we've been able to connect.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks so much for joining me in the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. If you liked what you heard, please rate this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or anywhere you tune in. You can also support the podcast by donating to my Patreon page, Anchor page, or Venmo account, which is at Grad School Femtoring. If you have questions or episode topics, you can contact me by sending me a DM on Instagram, sending me an email to gradschoolfemtoring@gmail.com, sending me a voice message on Anchor, or sending me a message via my personal website at YvetteMartinezvu.com. Until next time.